Okay, can everyone see the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, are we zoomed in enough?
Mm-hmm.
It's good.
All right, as soon as we start, here's Gwen.
Okay.
Hi, Gwen. All right, we are in Parshat Va'era, so we've rapidly moving through the story that is so familiar to us from Pesach. Va'era contains the first 7 of the Makos, first 7 plagues. And, as the unfolding, I think last year we looked at the opening of the Parsha where Hashem tells Moshe that he's appearing to him with a new name or a new characteristic. We're not going to spend time with that tonight, but it's this is really great stuff. I wanted to share really.
Beautiful.
I heard one idea that blew my mind, and I wanted to share that, but we'll have to lead up to it. So we are locating ourselves in chapter 8, right after the plague of Arov, or during the plague of Arov, of the swarms of insects. And this is the 4th plague. So we read, "Vayas Hashem Cain, Vayavo Arov Kaved Beta Paro Beta Vada V'chol Eretz Mitzrayim Tishacheta Aretz Mipnei Ha'arov." Hashem did as he said he would do, and he sends this swarm of insects to invade Paro's palace and the houses of his courtiers throughout the country of Egypt. The land was ruined because of the insects. Vayikra Paro el Moshe ula Aharon. Vayomer lechu zivchu lelokeichem ba'aretz. So Paro finally relents. He calls Moshe and Aaron. Says, "Go. You've been asking from the beginning to go be allowed to worship this God of yours whom I've never heard of. Go worship God, ba'aretz. Remain in Egypt and worship God." Vayomer Moshe lo nachon la'asot kain. Moshe says it wouldn't be proper to do this. Ki toavat Mitzrayim nizbach la'Hashem Elokeinu, ki nizbach et toavat Mitzrayim le'neihem v'lo yiskaludu. This is the pasuk we're going to really focus on, and it's a bit redundant and a little bit difficult to translate. The English that we have on our sheet says, Moshe replied, "It would not be right to do this, for what we sacrifice to our God Hashem is untouchable to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice that which is untouchable to the Egyptians before their very eyes, will they not stone us?" And the Hebrew here is to'ava, which is translated as untouchable, but to'ava we generally translate as an abomination. It's an abomination to Egypt. So then Moshe continues, "Derech shloshet yamim nelech bamidbar, v'zavachnu l'Hashem Elokeinu kasher yomar lanu." Let us therefore go for a 3-day journey in the desert, and we will sacrifice to Hashem our God as he tells us to do. Vayomer Paro, "Anochi eshalach etchem uzvachtem l'Hashem Elokeichem bamidbar, rak harchek lo tarchiku lalechet atiru badi." Paro says, "Fine, go to the deserts and sacrifice to your God. Just don't go so far away. And pray for me." And I think one year in Shul, we spoke about this prayer that Moshe offers for Paro, which is quite remarkable, that Paro asks Moshe to pray for him. That's how difficult the Makos are for Paro. And that Moshe agrees to pray for him is even more remarkable. Vayomer Moshe, "Hinei anochi yotzei imach, v'atarti el Hashem, v'sar ha'arov mi Paro me'avadav, u'me'amo, machar, rak al Yosef Paro hatel levitil shaleach et ha'am lizbach laHashem." Moshe says, "Fine, I'm going to leave. I'm going to pray to God, and he will remove this pest, this swarm of insects from Paro, from his servants, from his nation tomorrow." Right? Moshe says exactly when the relief will come. Rak al Yosef Paro Hatel, right? As long as Paro doesn't renege on his word to let us go and sacrifice to God. Vayetze Moshe me'im Paro, vaye'ater el Hashem. Moshe leaves Paro and he prays to God. It's a remarkable exchange. It's a remarkable interaction between Paro and Moshe. And I want to focus on verse 22, where Moshe says, Paro's initial concession is fine. You can worship, you can have time off, you can worship this God of yours, as long as you remain Ba'aretz. We normally think of Ba'aretz as referring to the land of Israel, but here Paro is referring to remain in Egypt, remain in Mitzrayim. Moshe says, no, that would not be proper. So what's the basis? What exactly is Moshe telling Paro? We'll start with Rashi. Rashi says, Toavat Mitzrayim, Yirat Mitzrayim, Kumo ulemilkom toavat b'nei Ammon. So Rashi is struggling with how to translate this word to'eva. Right, as we normally translate as abomination, Rashi says, no, it means something which the Egyptians revere. And that might be where the English that we saw comes with untouchable. It's something so sacred, something so revered, so sacred that that it's off limits to the Egyptians. The Eitzel Yisrael koreota to'eva. Right, so, and Rashi is kind of hinting, and many of the super commentaries on Rashi pick up on this. So if you look for a moment at the Siftei Chachamim in number 2, the Siftei Chachamim says, Ve'etel Yisrael korei ota toeva. Rotzel omar liYisrael haya omer kin v'lo leMitzrayim. Moshe calls it toeva, but that's not the word he used to Paro. When he spoke to Paro, he said, this is something special and treasured and revered to you. I saw other commentaries. I couldn't get the text, so I didn't bring it. I couldn't get the digital text. But other commentaries say that actually, right, Moshe changed the quote was edited or changed when Moshe recorded this later in the Torah. That when he spoke to Paro, he used the word, I don't know, Yirah, Elokei, that it's the God, it's the deity, it's the sacred object of Egypt. And only when Moshe
uses that one.
Yeah, when Moshe writes it down later for the Jewish people in the Torah, that then he changes and edits and uses the word toeva instead, right? Or else how could Moshe get away with calling the Egyptian god a toeva, something which is an abomination? So Rashi says, "Ve'etel Yisrael korei ota toeva." Ve'od yesh lomar b'lashon acher, or Rashi offers a second possibility: toevat Mitzrayim. Davar sanui hu leMitzrayim zivicha she'anu zovchim. Right? Not that the sheep or the ram is an abomination, but the fact that we're going to sacrifice it would be an abomination. Our form of worship would be something deplorable to the Egyptians. Sharei yiratam anu zovchim, because we're about to sacrifice their god. Uskalunu, right? Right, so the pasuk ends, et toavat mitzrayim leinehem velo yiskalunu. We're going to sacrifice their god. Will they not stone us? So Rashi tells us that we should read it that way. That beats me out. Right? He's writing it as a rhetorical question. So that's the proper way to read it. That they'll stone us if this is what we try to do. The Rashbam elaborates, and again, I think these first set of things is probably familiar to us, or at least makes intuitive sense. The Rashbam spells it out a bit more. Ki toavat Mitzrayim, sorry, let's go down to the next page. Tzon davar ma'us haya be'eretz Mitzrayim. Sheep were something, he says, despicable. Right, so there's actually a debate, and I think we discussed this also, maybe it was last year, when the brothers come down to settle in Egypt, and Yosef tells them that they should ask Paro to let them settle in the land of Goshen, ki anshe mikneh, because they're in the cattle business, they're in the herding business. So some say that the justification or the reason why Paro gave in to him is that um, it's something that's not proper, something that the Egyptians was below them. Some say the opposite, that it was something that is very precious and very, very sacred to the Egyptians, and it would be uncomfortable for them to see the Jews, or the Israel, Bnei Israel, whatever we're calling them at that point in their history, um, dealing with cattle. Um, and some say that it was kind of like a taboo thing, like because the sheep or the cattle were so sacred that to see how they're herded and how they're raised is something that should be out of sight for the Egyptians. But right, so in any case, so some think that the sheep is an Egyptian deity, but the Rashbam is saying no, it's something disgusting, despicable. And then he adds, just like Rashi, "V'lo yiskalunu," will they not stone us? Bitmiya derech bizayonu. Right. So again, so this is a question, right? Stoning was considered something despicable. Okay, whatever. The Nitziv, source number 5. Lo nachon lasot kain. It's not proper to do this. Ubier shnei ta'amim. Right? Moshe is giving Paro two reasons why it would be improper for the Jews to offer to worship God in the land of Egypt. Echad, ki toavat Mitzrayim nizbach l'Hashem Elokeinu ve'ein ze kvodcha lasot kain ba'artzecha. It's an abomination to Egypt if we sacrifice to our God, irrespective of the status of sheep. This is your territory. This is your home turf. It wouldn't be proper. It's like, I don't know if anyone follows sports, right? So there's right, this whole, there's been some news in college football with teams taking, upsetting a team and taking their flag and planting it in the middle of the field as a way of saying we're really the ones in charge here. We're the better of you. So it would be something like that. It would just be it would be undignified beneath you, Paro, if we were to do this this mode of sacrifice, this mode of worship, in your land, in your domain. In the second rationale, according to the Netziv, Hinizbach et toivat v'gomer im kain gam mitzidenu lo nuchal. Right? We also can't. It wouldn't be good for us to do this sacrifice, to do this worship in the land of Egypt. Mi yuchal lishmor et echad me'am shelo yizrok even alenu. Right? The Egyptians are going to be upset by this. For whatever rationale, they would be upset, whether it's because the sheep is a god of theirs, whether it's because they're offended and upset that these lowly slaves are now taking control and making our land like their home, right? They're going to try to literally throw a rock at us, not a formal stoning ceremony, but just out of their frustration, out of their anger, and we won't be able to protect ourselves. So the second rationale that, according to the Netziv, that Moshe gives is that it's it's for our own good and our own protection.
Is that possibly a basis for arguing that if we had a Beit HaMikdash, if the Jews were almost all in Eretz Yisrael and so on, that it would be prohibited to allow other religious services, practices to go on in Israel?
I mean, that's basically what all of Tanakh is, right? That's what most of Nevi'im is, is what to do. And there's worship of foreign gods taking place in the land, right? Sometimes, many times that worship was done by Bnei Israel themselves. That's an
I'd say
added.
it's probably more reflective of the reality of when the Parshanim are living, right? Like if the Jews were to try to have this big worship, even if they were given permission by the government to do so, there would be no guarantee for their safety necessarily. So maybe you kind of like channel that through.
Okay, so there might be some of that, right? Sort of contemporary application, right? Apply our current reality to what the Torah is saying. That could very well be going on here. I'm going to take a sidetrack with the next source, and then we'll come back in 7 and 8. But I wasn't sure where to put this, but I thought it was worth sharing, and so bear with me for this little tangent. Number 6, the Shemu Shmuel. He says as follows. This is not exactly on our parsha, but he comes back to it. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Bo el Paro. So this is actually the beginning of next week's parsha, Parshat Bo. Ki ani ichbadeti et libo, because I have hardened his heart. Yesh lavin. Halo kvar ne'emar lo bitchila shlichuto. Mikodem hatchalat hamakot shene'emar v'ani akshat lev paro v'yarbeti et atotai v'et moftai b'eretz Mitzrayim lo yishmar lechem paro v'yedu Mitzrayim ki ani Hashem. Right. So he's asking why, Hashem telling Moshe to go to Paro and insist that Paro let the Jewish people go because God has hardened Paro's heart seems to be redundant and superfluous. So why does Hashem repeat this again at the beginning of Parshat Bo? So he says, Nir elif faresh behektim, mashigid kvod kushato avi admor. So he says, in order to answer this question, I'm going to tell you a teaching of my father. This is the Shemu Shmuel speaking. So his father, I believe, was of Avraham Bornstein. Ahada Amar Moshe derech shloshet yamim neilech bamidbar. Concerning that which Moshe said to Paro, that we want to go worship God for 3 days in the desert. Paro Amar l'chuz yivchu le'elokechem ba'aretz. And Paro says, no, you can't go for 3 days in the desert. You can worship God ba'aretz, in the land. Ki Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom amar, ki kol ish hakariv la'avodat Hashem yitbarech, sarich mikodem lahachin atzmo. Moshe is saying that every person that wants to worship God first must prepare themselves for such an endeavor. Ulihitnakot mikinat ta'ava v'kavod hamityachasim achar guf v'nefesh v'seichel, and to cleanse himself and purify oneself of all the things that get in the way of having a pure body, a pure mind, and a pure soul. Can skip the paragraph, skip the parentheses. We're going to go down in the Hebrew vizehu. Zehu inyan halichat derech shloshet yamim. And this is why Moshe insists that they go in the desert for 3 days. Ke'in mashane emar b'matan Torah nechonim shloshet yamim lekavanazu. Just like we find when Bnei Yisrael are camping at Mount Sinai and Hashem wants to give them the Torah, that they need 3 days of preparation before receiving the Torah also. Uparo harasha amar zivchu lelokechem ba'aretz. Paro says, worship God in the land. Hainu im kol ha'artziot v'lo hachana klal. That means bring whatever state you're in now, whatever, right? In yeshiva they'd say whatever gashmius you have with you, whatever physicality, whatever impurity you're carrying with you, use that and worship God as you are right now. Achish litmonin lama sirev paro lazeh. Afilu lefi shitato she'in mehotzorech mikol makom lo yazik. Right, and so that's why Paro refuses, because his understanding is that you can, worship God as is. And he doesn't get into whether Paro just has an understanding that I think, like many of us, think, that there's sort of like this, like tit for tat, that you offer a sacrifice and you're automatically get whatever kapar, whatever atonement, whatever cleansing you need. So maybe that's the idea of prayer and worship that Paro has. And Moshe is saying, no, that to properly worship God requires hachana, requires preparation, right? And so this has serious implications for us, right? So the Shemi Shmuel is one of the great Hasidic masters, and we know that the one of the big knocks that people often make on Hasidim is that they're not makpid, they'll daven at any time. They don't care about zmanim, they don't care about what time halacha says to do. Chabad always starts at 10 o'clock in the morning, right? When I was in yeshiva in Israel, we had a Thursday night mishmar. There's this great chassid who was the pizza delivery guy, who would always bring us pizza and give us a great Dvar Torah. The problem was he was an Amshener chassid. So if you know about the Amshener Hasidim, they're the ones who are the most crazy with their zmanim. They're the ones who daven shacharis at 10 o'clock at night. And so that's not so good when you've got a bunch of hungry yeshiva guys waiting for their pizza on a Thursday night, and this guy who has no concept of time whatsoever was bringing it 2, 3, 4 hours late sometimes, but always with a smile on his face. So I just thought it was a nice idea that part of what Moshe is telling Paro is that it's not just that we can stop building pyramids for in 1 minute and go worship God the next, but proper worship of Hashem requires preparation. Obviously, that's true for us, not that we should ignore the importance of davening on time and being sure that we're meticulous with that, but that we should take some time to get ourselves in a proper state of mind. You can't just rush into it and expect that it's going to be meaningful for you or effective prayer, and whatever that means. Right? So that the idea of hachana, the idea of preparation, is very important, and that seems to be from the very first instance that we have this idea of worship as a nation. For the Shem Yishmuel, that becomes an important lesson that Moshe is trying to teach Paro and teach us as well. That's a detour. That's not really connected to what we've been doing, but.
Rabbi Kapowitz?
Yes.
Sorry,
Yes.
I have two questions related
Please.
to that. I've always wondered about this.
Yeah.
The first is, what's the time frame between and do any Mefarshim say how much time elapsed between when Moshe was first sent to Paro and when this occurs?
Yes. I've seen discussion of it.
Uh-huh.
I'm
How much and where does
blanking. I'm
okay.
I'm not remembering.
And
It's not like 1 day frogs, 1 day
yeah,
blood. It was an extended process. It wasn't just in 3 weeks we were done with the Makos and on our way out. It was an
right.
extended, but I'm not remembering.
The other question is, were the Jews, or whatever you want to call them, Bnei Israel, still enslaved at this point? Were they still making bricks and building whatever it is?
Presumably, that's the assumption. I mean, it's hard to believe during all these Makos that they would still enforce it and that they had the capacity to enforce it, but
Right.
certainly they were still seen as, if they weren't still slaves and still, quote, the property and under the domain of Paro, they would have just left. Like, why do they need his permission to leave?
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely that sense of control. Whether they were out in the fields working every day, I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know.
And a third question, I mean, it would seem from the end of Mikate that since the Egyptians themselves had to kind of sell themselves to Paro
Yeah.
In exchange for food, weren't essentially all Egyptians kind of slaves and property of Paro's?
Yeah, that's
Except for the
again we
priests.
right, except for the priests, it's hard to know if that carried on. We're at least 2 paros later from when that happened. Presumably by this point the famine is well past. So yeah, there is some element of that, and certainly the land is all Paro's land. That seems
Right.
to be pretty clear from what Yosef set up. Yeah, I mean, and it's not crazy to think that in an ancient society that the people were literally the subjects of the king, right? That's something that's well familiar to us from more modern history as well.
Yeah. They were
Clear,
serfs,
right?
like the
Clearly,
serfs in Russia. Yeah.
not this, not the same lowly status as Bnei Israel were. Bnei Israel were at a much lower status, but yeah, there was some. No one in Egypt. I don't think Egypt was seen as a democracy for anyone. As a free society. But what exactly the status was, again, your questions are way better than any answers I have, Rena. Sorry. We'll have to get an Egyptologist to come in and that would be really interesting. Okay. back to our normal programming. That was our commercial break. Rav Hirsch. Rav Hirsch says, an abomination of the Egyptians. And he's also struggling, as everyone is, with how to translate this phrase. He says it could be an expression in the mouth of Moses towards Paro, which it is very difficult to explain. Either that which to us is disgusting, that Egypt should consider a god, right? So Toivat Mitzrayim, right? We don't understand why Egypt would be so upset, but that is the case. And I recognize that's the case, but it makes no sense. You guys have it way backwards, right? You guys are missing out on something fundamental. Or that which is disgusting to Egypt that we should use as a sacrifice. That's, I think, how most of us have been reading it. In any case, it is characteristic of Judaism's attitude towards ancient and modern paganism. That to which other nations sacrifice themselves is what Jews sacrifice to their God. That which other nations sacrifice themselves is what Jews sacrifice to their God. The gods of other nations are the mighty forces of nature to which man must submit, as well as the powerful forces of nature within himself to which he is subject. They worship the forces about them and within themselves. But the Jew in his sacrifice kills the representatives of those forces and thereby makes himself conscious of his power of mastering the forces of nature within himself. And obtaining, right, this is a really interesting theory on korbanos, and why we have this idea of sacrifices at all. In obtaining free control of these and submitting them to the will of the Almighty One, he frees himself also from the dominion of all the blind external forces of nature. He sacrifices the gods in his own inner self and thereby breaks the chains of the dominion of the external forces of nature. Okay, so a really interesting concept that Rav Hirsch offers us as far as what is going on with korbanos in general. And also, right, I think it's not so far off to say that I want to use an extreme example, and I'm not sure if it's proper, but when the Taliban first started coming in the news, before, in the 1990s, right? It was for the for defacing all these sacred stones, mountains. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what it was, but all these physical religious symbols that existed for the local tribes in Afghanistan. All right. So part of what I think Rav Hirsch is saying is that we also, right, that part of Moshe's message is we're going to destroy. We have no sympathy, no understanding, no respect for your misguided worship. And so we're going to come in and destroy it. And that's, I think a very common thing that many religious people would take as a given and as a positive thing. I might be reading a little bit more into Rav Hirsch than what he's saying, but I don't know. We'll contrast that with the Chatam Sofer. And this is really where the entire shir is based. When I saw this Chatam Sofer, this was what for me was mind-blowing. The Chatam Sofer says as follows. Vayomer Moshe, lo nachon la'asot ken. Moshe said, it is not proper to do this. Hin nizbach et toivat mitzrayim leineim v'lo yitzkalunu. Right? We're going to sacrifice to the Egyptian gods, and won't they stone us? Surely they'll stone us. Yesh lomar. She'eno ra'ui lanu mitzad hamusar la'asot davar asher yadanu shelo yispelu hamitzrim. The Chatam Sofer says it wouldn't be ethical for us to sacrifice something which would be intolerable for the Egyptians to see. V'yirtzu liskalunu. They'll want to kill us. They'll want to stone us. There's an important piece missing up until this point. Paro, as Rina pointed out, is 1000% in control. Everyone is under Paro's domain. So if Paro says, let these Hebrews offer sacrifice to their God so that this plague will stop. Does anyone think that there's one single Egyptian who will go against Paro's word and cause them harm? If the Jews were to sacrifice in Egypt, they should be the most protected people in society for those couple days that they're given opportunity to sacrifice. Why would anyone harm them? Right? So the Chatam Sofer says, even if they know, even if Bnei Israel knows that the Egyptians can't and won't do anything to them, they also know that the Egyptians will want to do something to them. It'll be even more provocative and more in the Egyptians' face if we were to do it. גם אם יודעים אנחנו שבעזרת השם יתברך ידינו תקיפה עליהם, לא יוכלו להרע לנו, even if we know, because of God's help, that we have the stronger hand at this moment, and they can cause us no harm, בכל זאת לא נוכל מדרך המוסר לעשות כזה. From an ethical and moral perspective, it would be totally wrong for us to do this. וזה פירוש לא נכון. This is what Moshe means when he says it's not proper. Lo kasher chashadeta otanu la'anashim ba'alei midot ra'ot. Not right, not like you, Paro, accused us of being unethical, immoral people. Kimashe Amar v'nosaf gam hu also nenu. As it says that they'll join together with our enemies. Right, that was Paro's initial portrayal of Bnei Yisrael, that they're bad people, and that's why we have to subjugate them. No. Moshe is saying we're taking the higher road here. Even if we know no harm will come to us, knowing the pain and knowing the anger that it will cause the Egyptians makes it not right for us to do. So I'm reading that in contrast to Rav Hirsch, who Rav Hirsch is saying, right, that very thing which the Egyptians find to be their God is what we're going to sacrifice, and we're going to be in their face about it. The Chatam Sofer is saying the exact opposite, that it would be totally improper, right? And right, there's a lot of talk these days about decency and what it means to be, to be decent. And I think this is what the Chatam Sofer is saying, is that Moshe is saying we want to be decent people, and even if no actual harm or no immediate harm will come to us as a result of this, we still have to, even as slaves, we still have to live together, and it wouldn't be the right thing to do. So I think that's a remarkable comment. I don't know enough about the Chatam Sofer to know, Avi, if there's anything in his, he was living, 19th century, not so long ago. I don't know what was going on, if there's anything that we can directly trace to Austria-Hungary to, that would inspire such a thing. And I don't think it was known as a very tolerant, coexistent type of place, but maybe. But I think it's a remarkable comment, and we see in the next two sources that this carries through with other with the Malbim as well and other contemporary. The Malbim says, "Vayomer Moshe lo nachon lasot kain mishnei tamim," right? So just like we saw previously with the Netziv, he says there's two reasons why it would be inappropriate. Aleph mitzad hayosher v'hakavod, because of the right and honorable thing. It would be an abomination to Egypt if we sacrifice to our God. Because this sheep that we'll offer to God would be an abomination to Egypt. Right? They revere, they sanctify the sheep, and it would therefore be inappropriate. It wouldn't be proper to disgrace their deity by in their face in this way. And secondly, we can't do it because of the danger. So the Malbim is also very much saying that we have to have some level of respect, some level of dignity in dealing with the Egyptians. And then the Bechor Shor says something, right? He's much earlier. So he says Davar shehu nit'av b'neihem na'asev nizbach tzon, right? It would be abominable to the Egyptians if we were to sacrifice sheep. Bo or a, come and see. Kama nes asa HaKadosh Baruch Hu imanu b'chol yom. All the great miracles that God did for us every day. Shegadol kemoshe yir'eh al toavat mitzrayim v'hem omrim ki zavachnu tovatam. That someone great like Moshe was sensitive to the abomination of Egypt. Right? The great miracle is that Moshe was so sensitive and was able to be concerned about this, even this moment when we finally feel like, we've been subjugated and we finally are winning, we're finally have the upper hand, and Moshe still has this sensitivity. It's still, right? It's a remarkable, I think it's remarkable. I think it's something
Moshe
that
was raised in that
Yeah.
culture,
he
and
was raised in
it's
that
an
culture.
element of Hakarat HaTov that he received.
That could be. That could be.
And so there's a
Yeah,
certain
we know
dignity
that
with regard to
from the
that.
Makos also, right? That Moshe couldn't hit the Yaor, that he couldn't hit the Nile. That he does have an element of Hakarat Tov. That could be as well. To me, it resonates very strongly for us living, as a minority. That we have to be, it's sometimes surprising that you read about Jews, finding interesting partnerships and interesting political causes with groups that we don't normally associate with, right? So, one of the biggest, big issues is Muslim people wanting to wear the hijab or the hair covering. So oftentimes it's Jewish groups that are very strongly advocating to allow for it, because just like we want to be allowed to wear a kippah in public, and for women to wear to cover their hair, so we have to have a sensitivity to other religious cultures around us. Again, it's remarkable that they're saying this even about something which is avodah zarah, even about something which we know is totally a false religious practice. But nonetheless, we have to have a sensitivity to it, and that's something which I think is a very important takeaway for us. In this living in a day when so many people are asking if there still is any decency. I think it's a nice message as well. Paul, before we move on to part two, any thoughts or questions? Yeah.
I took up your challenge for the Khatam Sofer. He's definitely around during the time of the Jewish Enlightenment,
right?
And this move towards, like you were saying, like we're part of this community, loud and proud. Let's be Jews in Chutz La'aretz. Why do we need, right? Why do we need a hope for return to the land of Israel?
Right.
From the Haskalah side. So again, reading this into the context of, the right thing to do, and sort of the way that I was raised Jewishly was that you don't flaunt it, right? You wear a baseball hat when you go to the game. That's why, like, if you look at anything but at a baseball game, there's a large crowd and you see a whole bunch of baseball hats, the chances are that they're probably Jewish.
Especially if they're wearing a black pants and a suit jacket.
Yeah, exactly, and a white shirt, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting, this sort of like this mentality, and I'll share, and not to like ruffle any feathers, but like when I was living in South Florida, we went to at the hockey game, we went to a Jewish Heritage Night, and Chabad, I guess, was sponsoring it, and the Chazan sang the national anthem, and then during the intermission, they brought a menorah onto the ice and they lit it, right? And so it's just, and I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's so not like me, the way that I was raised. And I wonder how that fits, like the balance between what we've seen the last few Parshanim say of being sensitive to those around you and not sort of taking it for granted, versus like, what do you do in a place like America where you can worship freely, and everybody is sort of loud and proud when it comes to their religion? These seem to me very, I get them because I was raised that way, and yet it seems very, let's call it diaspora or hide your pride Judaism.
Yeah, so that's a if anyone else has comments, I want to hear them, but that's a great segue to our next
Oh,
source.
nice.
Yeah, but before we go there, I will say that I this past Hanukkah I was doing some teaching at Moses Montefiore, and I revisited we spoke a little bit about this at Shalashudas one week in Netivot. Um, the Lubavitcher Rebbe had two really interesting you know topics he dealt with. One was in the connection to Hanukkah was the public menorah lightings, um, and the second was about school prayer. And so he, I mean, obviously we all know Chabad is very much in your face Judaism, right? They're not going to hide, and they're certainly not going to put on the baseball cap. Um, but part of what he was saying was, when it comes to school prayer, that people were saying no, you have to have an absolute separation of church and state, and he said no. And he also said, the first campaign to bring some sort of school prayer or benediction failed, and so everyone was telling him, okay, it's over, we lost. And he said, no, you have to understand how the system here works, and you're allowed to go to the courts and appeal it. And so he very much was about working within the system, and he brought cases of menorah lighting also to the Supreme Court. So it's a really interesting perspective on that. But let's go on to the Masilat Yesharim. I see we're not going to have time to see everything inside. The Masilat Yesharim, which is the classic book of Musar, the classic book of ethics and character refinement, talks about the midah of Chassidut, and he doesn't mean like the Shem Yishmo. He doesn't mean a Chassid with a girdle and a shtreimel and whatever. But what he what they translate here as piety. And so he describes Chassidut as follows. I'll just read the English so we can go a little bit quicker through it. Okay. Starting with where it says paragraph 9. He who truly loves the Creator, blessed be He, will not strive and intend to discharge himself with the known obligations binding on every Jew. Rather, what will happen to him is the same as that of a son who loves his father. Even if his father reveals a slight indication of something he desires, already the son will strive greatly to the best of his ability to fulfill this thing or service. Even though the father merely mentioned it once and only halfway, this will be enough for such a son to understand the direction of his father's intent and to do for him even what he did not say explicitly. For he can deduce on his own that this thing will bring pleasure to his father, and he will not wait until his father commands him more explicitly or tells him another time. With our own eyes, we can observe this matter occurring at all times and in all places, between all friends and lovers, between man and wife, between father and son. The general principle: wherever the love between two is true and strong, one will not say to the other, no more was requested of me, it's enough for me to do what I was told explicitly. Rather, through what one was requested, the other will infer the requester's intent and will strive to do which he deems will be pleasing to the other. So the midah of Chassidut is what he's saying is not simply to say, the Torah says I have to daven 3 times a day. Okay, I went to shul for Shacharis, Mincha, Mariv, I'm done, right? But clearly, davening is something that Halach and God take seriously and wants me to do. So I'll find other opportunities to daven as well, right? You have to give maser, you have to give a tenth to charity. So I'll figure out what's my salary for the year. I'll write one check and I'll be done with it and fulfill my obligation for the year. No, someone comes to you, you have to be kind to them. You have to be empathetic. You have to donate of your time. You have to go beyond what's the strict check. It's not checklist Judaism. It's going beyond the checklist, right? It's to find the true intent. Okay, so after he defines what this character trait of Chassidut is, he then in chapter 20 talks about Mishkala Chassidut, how to apply this character trait. He says that's a huge challenge. This is the most difficult element of this notion of Chassidut. Let's read starting with here paragraph 3 or line 3. In truth, a person will not be able to succeed in this weighing without 3 requirements. So in order to understand how to properly go beyond the letter of the law, there have to be 3 things that you always consider. A, you must possess a most pure heart, having no other motive than to bring gratification to the blessed God. Nothing else besides this whatsoever. 2, you must examine his deeds very thoroughly and strive to rectify them according to this purpose. And 3, after all this, he must cast his burden on God, for then it will be said of him, fortunate is the man whose strength is in you. God will not withhold good from those who walk perfectly bitamim. If one of these conditions is lacking, he will not attain wholeness, shleimut, and is very likely to stumble and fall. That is to say, if his intention is not ideal and pure, or if he will be lax in the in-depth examination of what he is capable of examining, or even if after all this he does not place his trust in his master, it will be difficult for him not to fall. What a person needs to understand is that one should not judge the matters of chassidut according to their superficial appearance. Rather, one must examine and contemplate the full extent of where the future consequences of the deed leads. For sometimes the deed itself may appear to be good, but since the consequences are evil, one must abstain from it. For doing it would not have made him a chassid, but rather a sinner. When it comes to these areas beyond the letter of the law, you have to really be more of an artist than it's not about just scientifically do this, don't do that. It's really about being able to read a room and being able to understand when it's proper to do it and how it's proper to do it. You have to have that real sensitivity, that real sense of decency. And he brings some very powerful examples. Again, we don't have time to give a proper treatment, but I think the next source I hope is somewhat familiar to us. This is the most famous teaching for Tisha B'Av, the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, right? So there's as the story goes, right? A Kamsa Bar Kamsa Chav Yishalayim. Because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Jerusalem was destroyed. It tells us that there's this one guy who was making a party, and he wanted to invite his friend Kamsa to the party, and he had he's friends with Kamsa, he's enemies with Bar Kamsa. Somehow the mail got lost, the invitation got crossed up, the messenger got confused, and the invitation goes to Bar Kamsa instead of to Kamsa. So now the host of the party is all excited, and he sees his sworn enemy is at the party. Tells him leave. So Bar Kamsa says, please, you're going to embarrass me so much. Let me pay for my meal. Let me just stay and don't make me leave. He says, no. He says, I'll pay for half the party. I'll pay you, for half your guests that are here. He says, no, I don't. Your very presence is upsetting me. He says, I'll pay for the entire party. Nope, get out. And then the Gemara tells us that the rabbis who were at the party didn't do anything. They let this Bar Kamsa be embarrassed and be treated like this. And then the story continues that Bar Kamsa is so angry at not at the host, but at the rabbis. He says, I'm going to get them back. So he goes to the Roman emperor and he says, I know the Jews, they're not going to accept your sacrifice. If you try to offer a sacrifice, they're going to reject it. And so the emperor says, I don't believe you. So Bar Kamsa says, I'll prove it to you. Give me an animal, I'll bring it to the base of Mikdash and see what they say. So the emperor gives him this beautiful animal. Bar Kamsa takes the animal and nicks its eye, which is considered a a blemish in halacha, but wasn't a blemish by the Greek and Roman standards. And so the rabbis are now debating. We have this calf, this animal, which has a blemish, which would normally render it unfit for the Beis Hamikdash, but we know that really bad things will happen to us if we reject it. So they're about to accept it and they're about to compromise and say it's more important for Shalom to offer this sacrifice. But then Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkalus speaks up and he says, you can't do this. You can't compromise. They're going to say that that it's unfit for everyone but the emperor, and that there's a double standard going on. And so Zachariah ben Avkalus convinces them not to accept it. And so, and Rabbi Yochanan at the end of this passage says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Anvunato shel Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulus hechariva et beitenu. The modesty of Zechariah ben Avkulus, who wasn't able to properly apply this sense of decency and the sense of chassidut, of knowing when to stick to the letter of the law and when to be more flexible, that's what caused the temple to be destroyed. The Sarfate Chalenu, right? And caused the Beis Hamikdash to be destroyed, and Jerusalem to be burnt, and for the Galus, for the exile to occur. Really powerful self-reflective statement. But again, the point for us is that the message of this story is that there has to be some flexibility, right? It has to be flexibility in when it's okay to be machmir, and when it's necessary and okay to be makil, to be lenient. Right? One more example, and with this we'll close. A bit later on, he brings the Mishnah from Brachot, discussing what's the proper way to say Kriyat Shema. So we know, right, that the Torah tells us, B'shach becha v'kumecha. We're supposed to say Kriyat Shema b'shach becha when you lay down at night, v'kumecha when you wake up in the morning. So the Mishnah tells us, Beit Shammai omrim, be'erev kol adam yatev yikra. The Torah says, b'shach becha, when you lie down. So at night, when you say Kriyat Shema for the nighttime, you should literally lie down in bed, and that's when to say Shema, and that's how to say Shema. Uvaboker ya'amod. And when you're in the morning, when the Torah says uvekumecha, so you should say it standing up. Shene'emar ubeshach becha vekumecha. Uveit Hillel omrim kol adam korei ketarko. Beit Hillel says no, that the Torah is telling us the times to say it, but not the posture with which to say it. Say whatever is most comfortable to you. Shene'emar v'lechta chavaderech, because it says as you're going on your way. That's how you should say Shema. So why does it say, if that's the case, Beit Hillel, why does it say when you lie down and when you wake up, or when you arise? Right, at time it means the times when people would normally go to sleep and normally wake up. Amar Rabbi Tarfon, Ani hayiti baba derech, v'hiteti likot kedivei Beit Shammai, v'sikanti ba'atzmi mipnei halistin. Rabbi Tarfon says, I was traveling once, and it was time to say Shema. It was nighttime, and I wanted to follow the position of Beit Shammai. So I laid down in the middle of the road, and I put myself in danger because of the thieves that were on the road. I made myself vulnerable to their attack. And so then the Gemara, I didn't bring the Gemara, but the Gemara says, you can't do that. And so the question is, why not? Why can't someone who wants to be machmir like Beit Shammai be machmir like Beit Shammai? What's wrong with what Rabbi Tarfon did? So there's two answers. The Mesilas Yesharim tells us that number one is when it's a matter of machlokes and there's been a resolution to machlokes. Right? Everyone agrees that we follow Beit Shammai. When there's machlokes Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, so then it's not a time to be machmir. But also that you have to use common sense. Even if you want to be machmir like Beit Shammai, you can't be machmir when you're traveling. That's foolishness. That's not the proper application of chassidut according to how the Mesilas Yesharim describes it. There's a few other passages from the Mesilas Yesharim that you're welcome to look at. It's a remarkable book, and he says at the very beginning, it's probably the most famous hakdama of any introduction of any sefer written, where he says everything I'm about to write is everything that you all know. And I'm not saying there's no chidushim, there's no great novel insight, there's nothing that you don't know already. Everything I learned in kindergarten, but sometimes it's worthwhile to repeat and to remind yourselves of what you were taught in kindergarten. That's basically what he says, that these are just basic principles, basic ways that any decent person should live their life, and all I'm doing is giving a reminder. So I don't think it's a very accessible book, and the English translation is very good, so you're welcome to look at it further. But I thought it was a really interesting connection between what we started with Moshe's refusal to accept Paro's offer to worship in the land of Egypt, because as the Chatam Sofer says, that would not be the moral, right, just thing to do, to offer sacrifices, which is going to provoke and anger the Egyptians. We have to have sensitivity and the sense of what's decent and what's proper to do. and applying that in the more broad sense to this discussion of chassidut, of what true piety is, what true saintliness is knowing the arts of when it's okay and when it's proper to be machmir on yourself, and when it's and to be stringent and insist on that for yourself and for others, and when it's best to not, and to have that flexibility. Any final questions or thoughts on any of this?
I enjoyed the Mesilat Yesharim quotes very, very much. Of course, but one of the problems that one may have is to do something in a rote fashion instead of doing it with really an intention or some way of building their relationship with Hashem.
Yeah.
And that's I know that's another whole issue. He does bring it up though by describing something so very beautiful of someone who loves someone else. He tries to anticipate what they would want and to try to do things not for one's own sake. And some of this discussion of applying the intellect to make a decision about what is the proper thing to do comes back around to kind of self-preservation. In a way that, I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to think of some way of getting them out of Egypt. So this is the idea that he comes up with. But how, what's really going on there? It's another whole issue. But anyway, I mean, there's so much here that
I think an important thing is that we've spoken about this before, is that Moshe really has two missions. One mission is to redeem Bnei Israel, to take them out of Egypt, but the second is to get them to recognize and worship Hashem as well. So that if it was only mission one, then he wouldn't have cared so much about upsetting the Egyptians, because he knows that we're going to be leaving eventually. But he has to teach the Jews that when we leave, we still have to take the high road and know how to be ethical, moral people.
And it's a problem once teenagers begin to be very concerned about what is authentic and what isn't. That's another whole dimension of these things, it's another whole way of approaching many of these same problems. But it's it's pretty ambitious here, what you try to set out to do, I think. And for that, I'm grateful. You really give us a good challenge, lots to think about.
All right, well, that's the goal. Okay. So
Can I ask one last question before you go? Is
Please.
the title of this shiur intentional? Did you write Metz?
I'm missing an N. I'm missing an N.
No, because you wrote the Mets in there. Are you a Mets fan?
Absolutely not.
Oh, okay, fine. No, that's
not.
good. Because then you talked about sports, and I thought I made the
Right.
connection.
No.
All right, good. So that's fine. So I'm gonna just switch it for myself.
Yeah, the word schlecht, I thought maybe was what you wanted to do, to put the T afterwards, to have the word schlecht in there in order to cover the motuav. I would like to hear what Robert has to say about that word that's there. What is this word here, Va'era, with the Mentschlekeit?
The word that I made, it's just a typo. It's just a typo. I promise. Yeah.
If it's spelled,
we'll give it to you.
If it's Mentschlekeit, then it's something which is a badness or illness with a tendency towards evil.
Okay.
So so it works.
Okay. So maybe it was a subconscious, not a typo. I don't know. Okay. So there's some stuff going on in the shul. I hope everyone saw Phil Sager lost his mother, and he'll be sitting Shiva in Baltimore Thursday and Friday, with davening at his house on Thursday evening at 5:00. And we got news also that Yitzi and Jenny's baby was born. And so I imagine there, it sounds like there's going to be an announcement for a Shalom Zachar and a bris soon also. So hopefully everyone will be able to participate in those two things as well. Have a good rest of the week. Try to stay warm. It's cold out there. And have a good week, and hopefully we'll see everyone Shabbos, if not sooner.
Could I just
Thank
ask you
you.
about the Shiva on Thursday?
Yeah.
What time does it begin? When is he opening his house to people?
I don't know. I will try to find that
Okay.
out. I'll try to
Okay.
find that out. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Rabbi.
Good to see
Thank you,
everyone.
Rabbi.
Think
Bye.
about.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.